The night is quiet and still, except for the occasional call of a nearby owl. However, the air is abuzz, quite literally. The mosquitoes, gnats, and other flying bugs are like a thick mist in the darkness, swarming around our headlamps and biting every exposed inch of my neck, face, and arms. I almost can't stand it and constantly brush my skin and dance around to rid myself of the pests. But the other employees don't seem to mind. They're used to it. Bugs are a part of what they do during these late-night surveys because bugs are what bring the bats. And bats are the reason why we are here, checking the nets we've installed late into the night. I hear the distant yell from one of the biologists. We've caught one. This is Wild, a Utah Division of Wildlife Resources podcast. I'm your host, Faith Heaton-Jolly, and this is episode 25, Creatures of the Night. Welcome back to Wild, everyone. You can't hear, obviously, from my voice or the setting, but tonight we are out at Fildingar Ranch at Antelope Island State Park, and we are low-key getting eaten alive by bugs. It's like 10 o'clock at night. And I am here with Adam Brewerton. He is our Northern Region wildlife conservation biologist. Oh, there's like a giant moth. That just terrified me a little bit. Thanks for letting me come tag along with your fieldwork tonight.
Yeah.
This is very exciting for me. So we're out here tonight basically trying to catch some bats, which is out of the norm. Yeah, it's very cool. It's like a perfect night for it, but minus all the millions of bugs, but it's like not too hot, so it is kind of amazing. Yeah, like I said, very exciting because I have not done very much with bats. So Adam, tell us kind of what it is that you do. Kind of explain what your job is here at the DWR.
Sure. So I'm the biologist assigned to the region. Basically, like the main part of my job is to help with population monitoring and data collection for species of greatest conservation need.
And you kind of described it to me like these are mostly like species that are here in Utah, but not the ones we hunt, obviously.
Yeah, so they're species that are not, they're not hunted for one reason or another. Their populations are declining or have potential to decline or something like that. And we try to keep track of what we have, where we have, to try and help inform different habitat projects or shift habitat projects that might be more focused towards mule deer, but if we can adjust it one way to be more beneficial to something else as well, those types of things, and commenting back on development projects and proposals and things like that.
Gotcha. Like a lot of the species that maybe you're kind of struggling and you're like, I'm here to help them, and kind of here's what they need, and here's what we can do.
And a lot of the species tend to be a little bit more habitat specific. What they have is what they need, and what they need is kind of what's left, and so there's just a little bit more sensitive to impacts that can be around them.
Gotcha. And you'd mentioned, so obviously we're here doing kind of some of the bat part of that work. And talk about how long have you worked here for the division?
So I've worked with the division for about 12 years.
Okay.
And I've been in this position for almost 10 years now.
Okay. So the bulk of your career here has been helping some of these different species.
Right. It's been in this position out of the northern region.
Cool. That's awesome. I feel like you do kind of have a very unique job because, I mean, we've covered a variety of topics, obviously, on the podcast, but yeah, these are some of the species that people maybe don't really think of when they think of wildlife in Utah.
Right. Sometimes when somebody asks, like, which species I work with, I answer it's the ones that no one else thinks about.
Yeah. Unfortunately, yeah. So kind of diving into bats today, how many species of bats do we have here in Utah?
So it's a more complicated question than one might think, but the simple answer is there's 18. Only about 15 or 16 of them are in northern Utah, so a couple of them are just limited to the southern portions of the state.
Oh, I see. Okay. Typically, of the species we do have here, what do they primarily eat?
So all of the bats we have in Utah are insectivorous, meaning they eat bugs.
Okay.
They all hunt in different but pretty similar ways, either catching bugs while flying or gleaning bugs off the ground.
So you'd mentioned there's some of the species are only in southern Utah. Where typically do people find bats in Utah?
Everywhere. So
Okay.
one of the things about bats is each species of bats tends to be a little bit more specialized and specific on what habitats they use or what insects they go after and try and feed on or different things like that. But they sort of partition out, so like almost any habitat or any spot in the state will have at least one or a few types of bats.
I think people think bats and they're like, oh, they live in caves. But you'd mentioned like you can find them anywhere, really.
Yeah, so depending on the species, like some will live in caves, some live in like tree hollows, some roost in rock crevices. They'll use old barns,
Like
which is
where we're at
netting
tonight.
at tonight. Yeah, an old barn. And then a few species are actually, because they're more tolerant of human development in urban areas, they'll actually roost in houses and garages and attics. And
Gotcha.
we field a lot of calls of people saying, hey, how do we deal with bats that are roosting in our attic?
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Also, you can totally hear that on the podcast. The screeching in the background.
The
Is an owl.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the
what's-
great horned owl behind us.
Great horned owl. Yes, we
Yeah.
were checking it out earlier and I was totally nerding out. It's very exciting. So with bats, are they here in Utah? Do they hibernate? Do they migrate? Do they do both? Kind of how does that work?
Yes, and all of it and none of it.
Okay.
Some species will migrate, some species will hibernate, and then some species will migrate shorter distances to then hibernate.
Okay.
And then some species, we actually really don't know what they're doing.
Interesting. We see them sometimes.
We see them in the summers, and then in the winters, we just don't know where they go
Okay.
or what they do.
And the ones that are hibernating, kind of what is that time period usually?
I mean, it'll depend a little bit on the year, but typically it's about October, November when they'll go into hibernation, and then about March, April when they come out of hibernation.
Okay. So kind of similar to bears
Yeah.
type
Yeah.
season.
Yeah.
Okay. And with the ones that migrate, do they follow kind of that same
Yeah.
timeline or
Yeah, very,
okay.
very similar seasonal
Okay.
patterns for
So
them.
and I'm assuming they kind of go where the bugs are if they are migrating. So there's snow in Utah during the winter, I guess. So
Yeah,
there's
so I
not a
mean,
lot of
you know,
food.
same sort of migration patterns that like birds would follow. They'll fly south for the colder months. Some of our bats we know only go a little bit south, like to Arizona, northern Mexico. Some of our bats we know are much more longer distant migrants. They'll go all the way down into like Central America.
Oh, wow. That is quite a distance. And our bats here in Utah, you were kind of showing me an example of the size. So they're quite small, most of the species we have, I guess.
Yeah. Most of our bats are smaller. You know, I mean, if you think about bats worldwide, there's bats that have like the flying foxes that you'll hear about in more tropical regions. They'll have like, you know, large, big wingspans. I think the largest one is like a 6-foot wingspan,
Oh
like
my
the size
gosh.
of an eagle.
Oh my gosh.
But yeah, the largest bats here in Utah are going to have maybe about a 20-inch wingspan at the most for the larger ones.
Okay.
Actually sounds a little bit larger than what they, you know, really look like. I mean, that's
What they
wingtip
have.
to wingtip.
Sure. So they're usually pretty small. They're not going to
Yeah, a couple inches. And most of our bats are very, very small.
So with bats, and you kind of touched on this at the beginning, you're trying to help a lot of these species that maybe are more sensitive or have kind of these declining populations. How do we kind of quote unquote manage bats here in the state?
Right. It depends a little bit on the species. Some of our cave-dwelling bats and bats that live in abandoned mines and things like that, we can protect those roosting habitats for them. But typically it's more about just general habitat management, making sure that there's healthy ecosystems with all the trees, grasses, plants, ponds
That they would need
that
to
they would
survive.
need. Bats need access to fresh water. They need access to insects and bugs. And healthy ecosystems will have both of those things.
That's interesting. And I'm glad you said that because I think a lot of times when we talk about managing wildlife, people think we're actually like doing something to the wildlife, you know, or like something like that. But a lot of the times, like you said, we're just kind of making sure they have their shelter, their food, the water they need to survive type of thing.
Right, yeah. You know, with bats, one of the concerns that we do have is white nose syndrome, which is a disease. And so there's some more direct type things that we could do with it. But right now it's mostly just kind of watching and monitoring. We've yet to have the disease show up in Utah.
That's
So
good.
we're sort of in a vigilance type status right now, where
Sure.
we're just kind of watching and waiting to see what happens.
Okay. And when we do some, like you mentioned, hands-on work though, where we are doing surveys, and with some stuff like that we're doing testing to kind of monitor for the disease. So talk a little bit about, like, that's kind of why we're here tonight, right? Is we're doing some of these surveys. So talk about what goes into the surveys, like how we catch them, what we look for, kind of how that works.
Yeah. So maybe I'll just back up a little bit. The main purpose of this survey tonight is part of our like statewide general species composition monitoring. So what we're looking for is really which species occur where, and then how they balance. Do we find more of them one year? Do we find less of them another year? There's not a great way to actually count numbers of bats with this type of survey method. So we're really just looking for what is where, and then kind of the relative abundance of which species that we're finding.
Gotcha. So it's kind of just a sample of what's in that area and rough estimates of maybe how many.
Yeah, and it's more like percentages of of the bats that we caught, this portion of them were one species, this portion of them were a different species.
I see.
So we use a couple of different methods to do that. One is what we're doing here, where we're actually putting up nets, and we'll try and catch them. And then when we catch them, we'll identify what species they are, and then we'll take some other biological data with it, like what gender they are, whether or not they have signs of reproduction, how old they are. We can't age them accurately. We can just say whether they're young of year or if they're adults.
Also, on that note, how do you tell if they've had babies?
Right. So the females, we can tell if they're like actively nursing.
Oh, okay.
And then, or if they've like been nursing this year.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah. When you were saying that, I was like, how do you know?
Yeah.
Can you tell if they're pregnant too? I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Okay.
You can.
Okay.
And this time of year, we wouldn't expect to find any that are still pregnant.
Okay. When do they normally give birth?
Normally, we'll see that in June or July, and then this time of year is when we kind of start seeing the young of year coming out and flying around.
Okay. How long does it usually take the little ones to like learn how to fly on their own, type of thing?
Pretty quick, like 3-4 weeks at most.
Oh wow.
They grow quickly. They'll learn how to fly. They'll still be dependent on their mother kind of through the end of the summer season. But by the end of the summer season, they'll be hunting on their own as well.
Oh, that's very impressive. I'm going to have to tell my baby he needs to kick it up a notch. Like, they're already self-sufficient. What's wrong with him? Oh, that's amazing. Then you talked about the net surveys. What are some of the other methods that you've used?
Yeah, so the other method that we use is we call it the acoustic surveys. It's basically we use a digital recorder, and we record the echolocation, the ultrasonic echolocation chirps of bats flying around, and then the different species will have slightly different frequencies and patterns to their echolocation calls.
Yeah, that's so
interesting. We can with some, margin of error, it's not exact, but with some margin of error, we can identify different species based off of the recordings of their echolocations.
They're like sound, and you'd mentioned like a lot of their chirps they use to fly, they like you can't hear them.
Right, yeah, so their chirps are ultrasonic. They're higher pitched than we can hear with our human ears. And part of that reason is actually like beneficial, because those really high frequency sounds tend to degrade quickly as they travel through the air. So if they were lower frequency, as they're chirping, these sounds would just keep bouncing around, and they would persist through the airspace longer. So being high frequency ultrasonic like that, they get a more crisp image of what the echoes are saying to them.
Because they use it, I think I've heard the example, they're kind of like a submarine, right? They use it kind of like sonar.
Yeah.
Is that the right term?
Sonar and echolocation are very similar.
Okay.
I sort of like understand it a little bit better, that they just use sound the same way that we use light.
Okay.
So we're sitting here with headlamps on.
Right.
We're emitting a light that's going out, and then that light is bouncing off of objects and coming back to our eyes.
Right.
And then our brain is unscrambling that so we can see the world around us. Bats are doing the same thing. They're emitting a sound. That sound's bouncing off of objects, coming back to their ears, and then their brain's unscrambling it to where they can see with sound
Sure.
the world around them.
And is that because they just have like poor eyesight, or is that a misconception about bats?
That's a myth about bats.
Okay.
The whole
Okay.
that like saying whatever, blind as a bat.
Yes.
Bats aren't blind. Bats can see. I mean, as far as we understand, they can see just about as well as humans, if not a little bit better.
In the dark.
In the dark. The echolocation is, even if you can see pretty well in the dark, it's still hard to fly and not run into things.
Sure.
Or bats that go into caves where there is no light at all. No matter how good your eyesight is, you're not going to be able to see if there's no light whatsoever.
Right. That totally makes sense to me. And on that note, I guess they are primarily nocturnal, right? They mostly come out and are active at night?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then sleep during the day type of thing, find
Yeah.
somewhere dark to hang out.
Yeah.
Kind of going along with that idea, what are some other kind of common misconceptions about bats? Because I think there are probably a lot of misinformation out there that...
Yeah.
So what would you say is kind of the most prevalent ones, along with the blind factor?
Yeah, I would say, like, you know, blind as a bat is maybe the most commonly held misconception. I don't know. Maybe it's hard for me to say what's the most commonly or not. But ones I hear a lot is they will ask if bats are birds because they fly, and bats are not birds. They're mammals.
Oh, right.
They're the mammals that fly. They're the only mammals that fly. Some of the other misconceptions are kind of like bats are understandably a little bit like misunderstood, so they're kind of scary.
Sure.
And they fly around at night, so they're even scarier because it's dark out.
You can't see
yeah,
where they're coming
yeah,
from.
and so a lot of people have a lot of like fear around bats, and you know, when they find a bat somewhere and the bat goes to take off, they think that bat's diving at their head and being aggressive, and bats are really not aggressive at all.
They're just trying to get away
They're
from
just trying to
people.
fly, and they're not that graceful of flyers. And so they kind of have to drop a little bit before they can fly. And so
Gotcha.
people are like, it was diving at me. And it's like, well, no, it was just falling before it could actually like get its wings underneath it and get flying.
Right. I feel like one that I've heard just since I've been here is there's this kind of prevalent understanding that like every bat has rabies and they're dangerous because they're going to give you rabies. And
Right.
so kind of go into that. I mean, is that kind of common for bats to have rabies?
It's not uncommon. And I mean, in Utah, bats are one of the animals that is most prevalent with rabies,
Okay.
if that's fair to say. It's still a really low rate. And there's also a little bit of the way it's tested. There's a bit of a sampling bias. You know, if in the few studies that have been done about rabies infection rates in wild, healthier colonies, those infection rates are reported at less than 1%.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so, you know, fewer than, you know, like half a percentage, like one in every 200 bats might test positive for rabies.
Gotcha.
But when there's bats that are being found on somebody's porch out in the daytime, active during the daylight, if there's bats that are found places that typically bats are not going to be, those are bats that are suspect to not being healthy.
I see.
And
That's
those
kind of an
those
indicator.
bats test, I think it's about 20% or so on average.
I see.
So about 1 in 5 sick bats can be carrying rabies.
That makes sense. Okay. So kind of also you kind of segued into that. If somebody does happen to find a bat in their house or, you know, in their garage, trapped in their garage or something like that, what is kind of the recommendation for what they should do?
Right. There's sort of several different recommendations kind of based off of each scenario. But the first and most simple one is if there's not any sort of direct contact between a person or a pet and that bat, then just leave the garage door open, leave a window open, leave a door open, and let that bat kind of go on its way. Trying to do anything more than that can actually cause that potential direct contact and actually cause that risk of exposure.
Sure.
So if there's not that already, then leave the door open and turn the light off and go have a sandwich or something.
Yeah.
You know, if there is a potential that like maybe it came into contact with a pet or a person, you know, if one's found in like a bedroom and somebody's been asleep and you don't know whether or not that bat actually landed on the person or not, it's the recommendation always to take this safer route. You can call our office or call one of the local health department jurisdiction. That bat can get picked up and tested.
I see. and then they'll kind of
Yeah,
give you instructions
and
of
they'll,
what to
and
do.
they'll give you instructions on what to do.
Okay,
Yeah.
I see. With your work, this is kind of, like I said, a very unique aspect of wildlife management here in the state. What would you say is kind of your favorite part of, researching and working with our bat populations?
I mean, I'll be entirely honest. Bats are just really cool, and being able to like catch them and look at them up close and see them and handling it, like it's a very fun thing to do, just
Yeah.
because they're such different and interesting creatures.
Right.
Something that is nothing more than just like a dark flash going through the sky at nighttime all of a sudden becomes like a very interesting creature with facial features and interesting ears and wings and things, like when you can actually look at it up close.
I was about to say, I was telling you before we started, like, I've never seen a bat up close, so that's kind of why I was really excited to come do this tonight. And I've seen pictures, though, of some of the work you guys have done when you've caught them and have done some of these surveys. And they are, like, this is going to sound weird, but some of them are kind of cute. They're, like...
Yeah.
They really are. They're like...
they've got little, like, beady eyes, and they're, like...
Yeah.
Look up at you, and they're all fuzzy and brown. Yeah,
they are. It's kind of fun.
Once you kind of strip away a little bit of that,
the like stigma
and fear about them, and you kind of appreciate them for what they are. They've got some interesting looks to some of them for sure.
That's super fun. What would you say is maybe one of your favorite experiences since you've started working with bats? Like kind of a favorite moment or something that you've had?
Yeah. So. One of the bat species that we have in Utah is called the hoary bat. It's by weight our largest bat that we have in Utah, and it's got like dark blackish fur that has silvery ends to it. It's got kind of like yellow, golden fur kind of around its face, so it's a little bit more colorful. It's got like some white spots on it as well. A little bit more colorful, a little bit bigger. Because they're bigger, they can be a little bit more feisty when you're holding them, just because they know they can take you on.
Sure.
But hoary bats are also ones that migrate. They're ones that are known to migrate down into like Central America.
Oh, okay.
So they're just a very interesting bat. We catch them somewhat regularly, but not all the time. And one of the things that's interesting about them is that we mostly have male hoary bats in Utah.
Oh.
But I've had a couple of situations where I've caught female hoary bats, and one time caught one that was still pregnant.
Oh, wow.
Earlier in the summer. So
oh, that is cool.
That was a fun experience to catch that.
I was gonna say, and you've obviously been doing this for a long, long time. You've caught a lot of bats. You've handled a lot of bats. Do you still get kind of giddy? Like, is it still pretty exciting when you do catch some?
Every single time we go check the net, heart's racing
You're
about
like...
whether or not we've got one in there or not. And when we don't, it's so disappointing. And when we do, it's very exciting.
Oh, that's so cool. And I mean, obviously it probably depends on the time of year and the location and how many bugs there are type of thing. But how common is it to, like, do you normally catch bats when you're out trying to do these surveys, or...
It's so variable. It's really hard to know what to expect. There's a few survey sites where we typically catch more, and a few survey sites where we typically catch fewer. But yeah, any given night can just surprise you.
Totally varies. Yeah. I know. I'm like, I've got my fingers crossed that we're gonna catch some tonight, so I can see them up close. I'm pretty excited.
Yeah, and it seems like whenever we're needing to catch something is the nights that we don't.
Sure.
So.
Sure. I know. I'll probably jinx it, but anyway. Well, that's very cool. Yeah. Thanks for taking a minute to just kind of talk a little bit more about our bat populations here and kind of educate some of our listeners on some of the details and kind of fun facts about them. And as always, if you haven't yet, we'd love if you could subscribe to the Wild Podcast. We release a new episode on the third Tuesday of each month. So we hope that you will join us next month for some more wildlife stories.